I am Neil Edwards, and this is the Leadership Range, where we elevate the voices of Black and Brown coaches, leaders, and allies, and have soulful conversations about all things at the intersections of leadership, relationships and teams, well-being, and inclusion. Here I offer deep insights and practical tips for work and life. Today, you are going to hear from Dr. Akasha Saunders, coming in from Grenada. Akasha is originally from Jamaica, which is where my grandfather is from, my paternal grandfather. We met as fellow members of the Caribbean chapter of the International Coach Federation, where we both sit on the board of directors. I love this man. Akasha starts out sharing a little bit about his story coming up as a patois talking boy from Jamaica, getting early negative messages about who he was and the impact of it on him. We talk about how many marginalized people are simultaneously navigating the outside world while navigating the inner world of their identities to see how to make meaning and purpose in life. We could have easily been on the beach somewhere having this conversation, so come on in and join us. Dr. Akasha, welcome to the Leadership Range. It's lovely to have you here today. I think my guests are in for a real treat in this conversation. I've known Dr. Akasha now for, 2 or 3 years, and I've wanted him on the show for several months, and we've had to reschedule a few times. So I'm delighted to have this smooth island boy conversation with my island brother. So you all gotta watch out for this. So Akasha is a coach and a leader and a cosmopolitan. We just had a conversation. He's a cosmopolitan, and I'm gonna let you listen to his own introduction of himself. Akasha, let people know a little bit about who you are and what you do in the world.
Hey, Neil, thanks so much for having me on the show. Hello, listeners. We were talking just before this about, how do I want to be called? And then you throw in Island Boy. I'm like, that tops the list. And I didn't even mention that, Akasha, Dr. Akasha. None of these things matters when you say, Island Boy, because that very much defines a large part of who I am. Grew up in Jamaica, lived in Bermuda, island hop in the Caribbean for a while, now back in Grenada since July. So love the islands, love being surrounded by the Caribbean Sea or the Atlantic Ocean, or preferably both. Love seeing trees and feeling the breeze and watching the breeze do its thing to the trees. That's just it for me. And when I'm not watching the breeze make love to the trees, I'm coaching and teaching and facilitating. So do quite a bit of that work at the university here on the island. Love working with students, love seeing people grow, love seeing our young people maximize their potential, and or middle-aged people and or older people. I just love seeing people grow. So that's what I'm about. If you were to ask me, what do? I would really just say I'm just in the business of cultivating spaces for people to grow and develop.
Yeah.
And that just takes many different forms. So
You're in the business of loving people. I know you're really a
yeah.
loving man, kind man, and really look into people's heart and, try to create more love and kindness in the world. That's what I know about you. So welcome,
Thank you. Thanks for
of
saying that.
course,
Thanks for having me here.
certainly. So, Akasha, when I have folks on the show, I like them to share a little bit of a story about their life, and you started to do that. But what I really want listeners to hear is, how you've become the man that you are today from a leadership perspective. So if you can tell us a little story about your life, beginning at whatever inflection point or starting point is important to you, and just kind of hit a few points along the way that have been crucial in shaping and expanding and extending your leadership over time up through today.
Yeah. Yeah. mean, there are two stories come to mind, and they're gonna somehow flow into each other, hopefully. One is when I left Jamaica for the first time. I was 11 years old, and I went to another small island, Cayman Islands. And while there, people made a lot of comments like, "Why you talk so bad? You don't." I was deep in my Jamaican patois at 11 years old. People were like, "You dunce or something," and I learned then at 11 years old, Neil, that it was a disadvantage. This was the sense that my 11-year-old mind
Mm-hmm.
was making. It was a disadvantage to be Jamaican. It was a disadvantage to speak anything other than standard English. Okay, proper English.
Queen's English.
The Queen's English, precisely because Cayman back then still is now is a British colony. So boy, quite proper.
Mhm.
And so that was a significant inflection point for me because when I got back home, I had made a decision that I was no longer going to talk Jamaican patois. I was going to train myself to speak proper English, and lots of challenges along the way. Family members accusing me of trying to be better than them, better than what I am,
Mhm.
showing off, um,
Mhm.
trying to be too smart. So picture this, right? So on the one hand, people saying you're too dunce because you're speaking Jamaican patois. And when I convince myself to stop that and speak proper English, then people are saying, well, you're trying to be too smart, you're trying to be better than us. So I'm like,
Mhm.
well, what the heck? I lose, and where I go, I lose.
Yeah.
you know,
Who you think you is?
who I think I is talking like that. I'm from the country, a little poor village in Portland, Jamaica. So that was a defining moment for me in terms of my relationship with my culture. And I know we're going to get into that a little bit more later.
Mhm.
The second story is more directly a leadership story. So, and maybe about 8 years ago, a colleague and I, another coaching colleague, we said we thought about doing some work together. And the thing that we decided to do was to host men's retreats. And I was living in Bermuda at the time, and so we said, hey, I could rent an island, invite some men, and we try and meet them where they're at in terms of their identity, provide some light coaching, but also practice and engaging across our differences, because it turned out that we had about half gay men and half straight men who signed
Mhm.
up for this retreat, or quite literally 50-50. So we thought, what a cool opportunity to make contact across our differences and to see what transformation might exist in that space. Lots of research suggests that that can be a transformative experience for people. But, research is research. Practicing it is a different thing. So I was very much interested in like testing this thing out, practicing it and see what happens. And it was quite powerful. But in the preparation for that retreat, my colleague and I were putting a team together. And it turned out that all the members of this team were Americans, except myself. All the members of this team, well, I would say maybe 95% of the members of this team were white. So white, American, and all men. And there were moments as we were working together. My colleague was a white American man, and we're having team meetings, and I would, say a thing. Yeah, I think your listeners, you, Neil, and your listeners will perhaps find the examples I'm about to give, not unique,
Give
So
it to us.
I'm there sharing some ideas, giving my perspective, no one saying anything. Then my white colleague say the same thing, almost verbatim. And everybody's like, what? That's awesome. Why didn't we think about this or hear someone else say this before? And I'm just like, oh, really? So it threw me off big time, I'll admit to you, because I'm like, what the heck? So is it my language? So this is where the first story came into play. Like, is it my accent? And these American guys aren't really understanding me. But then why aren't they saying something? So then I'm like, well, is it because of how I'm communicating besides my accent? Is it because of the way I'm communicating? Is it
Mm-hmm.
something to do with the way I'm leading that's not effective? Because the way I was seeing my leadership was different from how it was playing out, or at least the impact that it was having with the people I was working with. So I'm like, darn it, it must be something with how I'm leading. I wasn't thinking, oh, there are some cultural things there. And I actually wasn't even thinking that possibly I could be fine, and it may have been something with my colleagues and my friends.
Mm-hmm.
The automatic place I went to was something is wrong with me, either with
Yeah.
my language, either with the way I'm seeing things, either the way I'm leading. Something is wrong with me. Akasha, who's trying to put together this thing and saying he's a leader in this space. So it was so challenging. I'm like, God, here I am trying to lead and it's not working out. I can't be a leader, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so that experience was a big shift for me, because one of the things I did after that was reached out to someone who did developmental coaching work, because I also felt, here's another story that I had to confront then. So part of my socialization, you see, because when I first encountered the idea of development, I was also still very young, still in high school, around 12, 13 as well. And what I knew my 12-year-old mind knew back then was the global South, Jamaica. People like me and where I'm from were underdeveloped, especially when compared to North America, Europe, and anything and anybody that's white. Okay,
Yeah.
I am underdeveloped, and so here I am again, mostly white people. So I'm like, oh crap. Okay, I guess I'm not actually developed enough to be here and to be making sense to these developed people. So I'm like, no, something is off with me. So I got an opportunity to confront these stories, these assumptions, and we might even say these misconceptions and lies about our place in the world as people from the global South, people who walk and live and breathe in black bodies, and we could go on and on. So
Mm-hmm. Not
those
just
two
people in the
stories,
global south, but all
yeah,
about you.
yeah, exactly.
So hmm, I'm very curious about what you learned. You said you went and you worked, you had a conversation or you work with somebody that's in development.
Yeah.
There's probably a lot that came out of it.
A lot came out of it.
What is the big thing that came out of it for you?
Yeah, a reintroduction to myself. A reintroduction to myself came out of it for me. Um, Learning to look at myself, but not as a flawed self. Learning to see also the things that made me up until that point, and even
Mm-hmm.
now, the
Mm-hmm.
assumptions, the beliefs, the ideas, even the identities that made me up.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a bit of an audit of myself, but not to look for any mistakes or anything that's lacking. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, what is the thing that makes up this person?
So
you know
getting to know you.
yeah, yeah,
Who
yeah.
am I really? At
That's
least
right.
up
that
until
was
now.
that was a big question, actually. There
Mm-hmm.
were three big questions that developed for me during that experience. Who am I really? Really, really, really?
Mm-hmm.
What am I here to do? And I was deeply spiritual, religious, I would actually say back then. So the third question was, and what does God want of me? You know, there are sub questions to this. What does God want of me? Because one was like, what is God anyway?
Mm-hmm.
Who is God anyway? Was how I framed the question back then. So there's a,
Yeah.
who am I really? What am I meant to be doing here? And what does God want me to do? Who is God and what does God want me to do?
That's
And
fascinating. Mm, maybe this is another conversation for another time, but I'm fascinated by what am I here to do?
yeah,
What does God want me to do?
yeah,
And what's the difference between the two?
yeah,
Like what struck me is like, how could there
yeah,
be a difference between the two of you? If there is a God
yes.
and you're here to do something, who else is there but God to tell you what you're here to do?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. This could be the conversation because we could go so many places here. Because there's
Yeah.
a journey about that. Because one of the places those questions took me was on a pilgrimage, a 500-mile walk across northern Spain, from south of France to northern Spain, the Camino de Santiago.
Mhm.
And I found some clear but deeply disturbing answers to those questions.
You laugh about it now, but
Of course, I can laugh about it now, but back then it was like painful as heck. Liberating, though, I would
Mhm,
admit. So disturbing, clarifying, and liberating.
mhm,
Um, those answers were, and a part of the liberation was also from even how I was holding God and the practices and beliefs and ideas about God back then. A lot of those things shifted for me over those 500 miles. 35 days walking in the hot summer Spain sun. You know, people might say you went crazy. That's why your ideas changed.
yeah. I'm looking at your face now as you say that, going, "You think you were crazy."
I thought I
What?
was crazy. So many things happened on that walk. I was like, no, 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 something is, I think I'm crazy. Am I crazy? you know.
All
Um,
right. Well,
but
that's oh, that's fun and fascinating. I remember you telling me the some parts of the story about your pilgrimage, and that's I've not done something like that, but boy, I want to imagine that I could imagine, but
yeah,
I know I cannot
yeah,
imagine it unless I do it.
yeah.
You gotta be out there doing it.
The thing I would quickly say about this too, Neil, is, and everyone that's listening, is like when we go looking for ourselves, like who we really, really are, man, you gotta be careful because you'll find yourself. And that self will surprise the heck out of you. You'll be like, yo, who is this self that I'm meeting here? I didn't know this self.
Mhm,
And as we get to know this self, early in this conversation, we were talking about home. Like
mhm,
you asked, where is home for me? And I had said something like, there's so many levels to it. And one of the levels is within myself. Myself is home. So I think if we deeply go look for ourselves, we'll find, we'll find who we are, and we'll find home. We'll
mhm,
find peace. We'll find purpose. We'll find connection. We'll find period.
mhm. We'll find and be open to that finding. So the thing that we're talking about, as I understand it, is growth between our inner and outer worlds.
Mm, mm.
Mhm. Tell folks what that means.
Yeah, yeah. We're navigating both worlds, at least both worlds. Some people might even say more than that. So we're navigating our external world and how we move through that. But especially for people like us who belong to some sort of marginal or marginalized identity group, be
Mhm,
it be it because of our race, because of our gender, because of our sexual orientation, country of origin, religion, whatever. So we're navigating the outside world in our sort of marginalized identity. And how are we doing that has an impact on who we are, who we become. Even our health, lots of studies and books and so on out there talks about the implications on the impact on our mental health and physical well-being and so on from navigating these worlds. Okay, but while we're navigating this external world, we're also navigating inside of ourselves. Because we're a system to ourselves as much as we're navigating the systems out there in the organizations we work with, the communities we live in, the institutions we get services from. We're navigating those systems, but we're also moving through ourselves. Going back to what I was sharing earlier, looking for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So as we're navigating the external world, something is going on within our internal world. Oftentimes we might not be explicit about it or explicit about focusing on it. So this thing about growing as we navigate internal and external world is really an invitation to slow ourselves down as we are navigating, because navigating is movement, right? We have to be moving through the world.
Mm-hmm.
So as we're moving, can we slow ourselves down to see how we are as we are navigating the world out there and navigating the world in here, as we're making meaning of our identities, making meaning of how we're moving through a dominant culture, making meaning of our sense of exclusion or inclusion. Like
Mm-hmm.
what about us that feels included or excluded, that feels like we belong here, wherever the here is? So can we slow ourselves down to notice, like what's going on in this space where we are, the space that we create when we slow down to notice how we're moving through the external world and what's going on inside. And
And what
so part
and
of,
what and what what I want to say is, in that space where you say we need to look at how we're moving, um, what aspect of ourselves is in front, what aspects of our identities are making the choices in that
that's
space,
right, that's right,
and
that's
pointing
right,
us in the direction that we need to go on that compass,
that's
because we
right,
have all of these multitudes of aspects of our identity. Which version of
exactly,
me is here now,
exactly,
and how is that version moving in this
yeah,
space?
exactly, exactly. Because we are, I love what you're saying here, brother, because we are many. You know, the Jamaican motto is like out of many, one people. Although it's talking mostly of the external world, but I think it's true of the internal world. Out of many, one. So and in each one of us, there is some identities that are dominant. Like you and I are male and heterosexual in this world,
Mm-hmm.
so dominant identities. And then we also have marginalized identities, being Black, being from the Caribbean, and we could name so many other things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all of these identities are inside of us. And to your point, which is taking charge, and when, in what context, with who, and what are the implications of, when this identity shows up and take charge. And the key thing, one of the key things there is like uh, how intentional are we? How aware are we around which identity is taking charge? So the slowing down, allowing, being in that space and allowing the space for growth is actually giving ourselves some agency around which identity is showing up, but also which identity do we want to lead with? Are we minimizing some parts of ourselves? Are we elevating some parts of ourselves at the risk of other parts? And are we consciously doing that?
Yeah,
So it's
are we
about,
making intentional choices about
yes,
the aspects of ourselves that we want to show up in this moment
yes, yes,
right now?
that's
Yeah.
right. So in a way, what we're talking about is like living intentional lives, living a life to our choosing, you know, um, living a life that celebrates the fullness of us, even as there are challenges and even risk in navigating these dominant spaces and cultures and systems that we have named already.
Mm-hmm.
Like, some of that stuff is real for a
Yeah.
lot of us.
Like when
And
you went
there's
to Cayman
like when I
and they,
went to Cayman, right? And for
yeah.
and some of us might say, well, that's even like low risk. For me, it felt high risk, but in the context of things, it's like there's some people who are like trying to save their lives and the lives of their children
Mm-hmm.
as they navigate dominant cultures. So the risk is real, and I know you and I would never downplay that at all, you know. So I wanted to at least name it. But
Yeah,
in that space,
context matters because it ranges from just trying to fit in a little bit to saving your life
trying to
and your
live,
family's life and
yeah,
just trying to live.
yeah,
So so it underscores a question that I have. Um and yeah, and I feel like it's worth asking it right now. So why is what's important about this to our listeners, particularly listeners who are navigating corporate space?
yeah. You know, I have a few biases. Some of them I know, some of them I don't know. Like all of us, I might add. And one of my bias is around, you know, full expression of ourselves. This is part of what we have been talking about. You know, how do we discover who we are and live into that as fully as we can? And I know for quite a few of us who work and live in predominantly white spaces, we to cope, to survive, we often minimize certain parts of our identity, especially those that the dominant culture already marginalizes. You know, so we try to even convince ourselves at times that those identity don't matter. We just need to be competent. We just need to prove that we are smart and that we are capable of doing the job. Okay, and sometimes certain parts of our identities suffer as a result of that.
Mhm.
What you and I are talking about here is it's a combination of us bringing awareness to the cost of moving through our work and life and play in this way. You know, bringing awareness to how we choose to move,
The
and then making some.
the cost of marginalizing aspects of ourselves
That's right.
in
That's right.
service of trying to fit into
To
some
fit
dominant
in.
culture. Okay.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And it's not to say that there aren't benefits to fitting in, because there are real tangible benefits to fitting
Yes.
in. You
Yes.
know, to not seem in a threat to our white male colleague or boss. You know,
Hmm.
more likelihood of getting promoted and getting, you know, increase in salary and other benefits and so on. So there's some real tangible benefits,
Hmm.
and there's some
So
real
so
costs.
I keep intruding on Akasha here because for those of you who listen to the podcast on Monday, March 1st, what I didn't say in that podcast about black men is the subtext of the threat that a black man is to a white
Yes.
man.
Yeah.
Now,
Yes.
people might push back on that, but we ought to realize that we live in a socialized context and there are a lot of things happening in the subtext.
Yeah. 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 And how many of us, I wonder, you know, because a lot of this, I would say, is based on real events, you know, historic, I mean, slavery, colonization, and being socialized on all sides about how to treat each other and how to engage with each other. You know, so from a place of dominance or a place of submission, a place of fear, a place of aggression, and so on, you know, a place of oppression and a place of being oppressed, you
Mhm.
know. So we're socialized into these roles around our identities, you know, and even though in some ways the conditions have changed, right? But we are also still living based on those early conditions and socializations.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that there aren't systems of injustice in the world and racism and other forms of injustice and inequality and so on. But what I'm saying is, for me, like Neil, when I was growing up in Jamaica, and when a white man came to our little town, I literally thought that he was like Jesus. I could care less about who that person is. My little 6, 7 year old brain is like, I mean, I grew up in a Adventist church, and all the pictures are of God and Jesus are these white, handsome men. So when I see a white, handsome man, actually, I didn't even think about handsome. It's like once he's white, he's handsome. And once he's white, he's Jesus. Holy, blessed, more developed, miracle worker. Right? So, so
You were conditioned already.
I was conditioned already, so it became my work as I mature to actually look at these conditioning and then choose how I choose for myself, how I am and how I want to engage with others. A part of when this became even more serious for me, because I've been doing work on this thing for years, and then not very long ago, I was going to this workshop, Neil. This workshop was around how white fragility impacts communities of color. It was a workshop with Robin DiAngelo and a brilliant black psychologist, Ken Hardy, who's based in New York. They did this workshop together, and I'm on my way to this workshop. It was in San Francisco, close to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I got out of the plane. When you got out of the plane and you sit for a while, you really gotta go. So I'm like making a beeline for the restroom, and my body stopped. And I'm maybe 3 feet from the door to enter the restroom. And my body stopped. I looked up and I saw a white man that was about 7 to 10 feet away. We were the only two people that were going for the restroom. And I stopped and waited for this man to come and enter the thing. I'm like, what the heck did my body just do? What just happened here?
What part of you made that choice?
What part of me made that choice? So this is an example of also what I mean about the slowing down. You see, when we're navigating the outside world and also navigating the inside world. So of course I had to pee, so I went to pee, but I kept reflecting on this thing. What made me slow down? I wasn't being nice. I'm a nice guy. A lot of us are nice people, but I really wasn't being nice in that moment. And oftentimes there is another little tangential thing, but quite related. Sometimes
You were not being nice to yourself. You actually
that's
were
right.
marginalizing yourself.
I was
You were
marginalized
traumatizing yourself.
myself.
You know.
Exactly. I mean, in a lot of ways, because I could have peed my pants, and that's another type of trauma right there in public. So not to mention my Black Caribbean identity being marginalizing my Black Caribbean identity, but also my body.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, what we're just talking about just now is actually a really interesting thing to name, which is the being nice, Black men being nice,
Mm-hmm.
and also the cost to ourselves of being nice. Even though the perception of us being nice isn't necessarily the reality. So white people, mostly white women, they say, oh, Akasha and Neil are very nice. And that may be true on one level, but some of it might also be um, a sort of unconscious way of protecting ourselves, because that's
Yeah.
a part of the socialization as well. And so
Yeah.
in the being nice, what's the cost to us? What's the cost to me? So like that constant interrogation again of what am I doing here? Who am I being here? Which part of my identity is on center stage here? And am I making that choice consciously? And what's the cost
Mm-hmm.
of showing up? So as we going back to your question about like in reality, when we're in corporate America, in wherever we live, because not just America, here in the Caribbean, I live in an island that's 85% Black and work at a university that's led, like the administrative roles are occupied, like 80% of these roles or so are occupied by white expats. So it's partly geography, but partly not geography. It's partly how the world has been built and structured around dominance and submission, race, gender, and so on, being in positions of power. and other identities not.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these
Colonialism.
things are play. Yeah. So when we're in organizations, bringing consciousness to how we navigate these systems, the system out there and the system in here, inside you, inside me. That's the thing that we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
Bringing conscious awareness to how we move through the world. And I think this is another one of my bias. I think when we slow this process down, I think growth is possible. Growth is possible other ways, but I think when we slow down, look at how we're moving through these spaces, we can grow, we can transform, we can liberate ourselves.
Yeah, but we notice.
Yeah,
We notice more. I can,
yeah,
I have an example. It's a little on the lighter side, right?
yeah.
But I've been in the US for a while. My voice, my accent is a little different now than it was, before I came over.
You've
And
standardized your accent.
yeah, and but I still process things in my mind
Mm,
as a Bahamian. I still have island language in my body.
mm,
I still interpret
mm,
things in island ways, and my soul wants to respond in island ways. And I noticed not that long ago, I would say maybe within the last 10 to 12 years, professionally, facilitating speaking in public spaces, in business, in change management or coaching or whatever, training or whatever. And as I've become more comfortable doing that kind of work, I would notice because I had the ability to both to simultaneously go fast and go slow. I could notice myself being
mm,
myself
mm,
in the moment.
mm.
And I started to notice in response to like participant or student questions or something like that, a response that I had in my soul that was Island Boy. And the words that were trying to come out of my mouth were Americanized, they were adapted. And
Yeah,
what I started to do to experiment because it was a cost to me, I realized that I was muffling myself.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
was
yeah.
marginalizing my truth.
Yes,
The way
yes.
I saw the world and the way I made meaning out of things in context. And so what I experimented with was this I would tell a story. I would say, hey, I mentioned I was from the Bahamas, or I would say it at that moment. And I would say then, in the Bahamas, we might say X. And I would just say it with my
Love
island
it,
tongue.
love
And
it.
then I would say, here's what it means and respond to their question.
Yeah, yes.
And the cost prior to that was slightly lower engagement of students or participants.
Mm-hmm.
When I did that, I
Mm-hmm.
was being more authentically me.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
And there's something in the human soul, something in the human heart that can experience and knows that that is a truth.
yeah, yeah.
And
Like
it
we
brings them,
respond to
yeah,
authenticity.
yeah. So it brings them closer to me and
Of
me closer
course,
to them.
of
So the
course.
cost up until that point was I was losing human connection.
Yeah, yeah,
But I
yeah.
had to realize, I had to slow down enough to realize an aspect of myself that I was marginalizing.
Yeah, yeah, this is a powerful story. I wonder how many of us are like living on either side of this story, where um, we are moving so fast that we are still marginalizing ourselves, or where you have been, where you've practiced and practiced, and you're now like on the other side of this, where you're slowing down and bringing in your culture more. Because this is what I see as the opportunity for a lot of us, the slowing down, the notice, and to bring in parts of ourselves that we have been muffling or minimizing or suppressing. So I
Mhm.
do a lot of this work with leaders, and I run this workshop called Leading Inclusively. And one of the things that we do, we have people actually take an assessment, intercultural development inventory, that
Mhm.
measures our our capacity for engaging across differences, recognizing, engaging, and adapting to differences, you know. And one of the things I hear from people is across age, gender, race is exactly what you were pointing out here. That especially those, so across gender, age, race, but the thing that's in common is when we are living, when we belong to a marginalized group and work and function in a predominantly white space, is that people worry about the risk in bringing more of the authentic expression of their identities forward, and not just doesn't have to be one. Like that's the big struggle. And so when we explore the possibility of bringing more and more of that, it's like people feel like they can breathe, like they
Hmm.
can relax, because it's to your point, is their authentic expression, even without getting to the benefit of deeper intimacy with others from expressing our authentic self. Because I completely agree with you on that. My experience, what I've observed in others, the more we express who we are, even beyond our cultural identity, but inclusive of our cultural identity, the more connected we become. Because in reality, organizations actually benefit from this, but we don't say this a lot.
Hmm.
Organizations, and I don't just mean like, looking good and people say, oh, that's a diverse organization. No, it's when we bring in these multiple perspectives, our Bahamianness, our Jamaicanness, our Egyptianness, our Lebanese-ness, like when we bring in these aspects of ourselves into the organization, it benefits because especially in like these complex times, diversity really helps organizations navigate through complexity really well. So
Hmm.
not just the American perspective, not just the white perspective, not just the male perspective, but as
Global
the
perspective. It's a
global
global
perspective.
perspective,
That's right.
and it matters because we're, whether people like it or not, we're globalized,
Yeah, yeah,
and whether it's making decisions, solving problems, communicating from a business perspective, quite frankly, making money. Um, this is a tremendous value. And when
yes,
we marginalize aspects of ourselves, we're actually not bringing our best to work.
that's right, that's right.
If we're asked to bring our best to work, we need to bring our whole self to work, not just because it's a PR tagline. You
Yes.
know, and I'm kind of mad at you because I know you didn't listen to my episode on full expression, but you used that language here today. So go check it out.
I will, I
It's
will.
about leadership and full expression.
Mm,
But it is exactly this is, we need to be cultivating. We need to work on bringing all of ourselves forward and getting skilled at being intentional about what aspects of ourselves we bring forward
yeah,
in that space in between
yeah,
our inner world and outer world so that we could skillfully navigate and skillfully contribute
yeah,
right
yeah.
aspect at the right time. And we're all a work in progress, right?
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And work and progress are like operative words, It's like, because I don't like, what's the possibility of you? What's the possibility of me? What's the possibility of us? I don't know.
Who knows?
I don't know. But I think what we're talking about here, like the more we explore that and step into our possibility, like, the more we get to know about what that might be. I don't know if there's an end to it, but I know I haven't reached mine.
No, no way. I dwell in possibilities, and it's a lifetime journey. But the faster we get to that place of slowing down and noticing,
Yeah,
you know, the more access we have to the equity that lies within us
yeah,
as we bring
yeah,
more and more of our aspects of ourselves, our identities forward. So, Dr. Akasha, what are a couple of things that our listeners ought to do to begin this process of slowing down and noticing what's in that space in between to support their growth?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing is really like what, one of the first things at least is what we just named. It's like hurry up and slow down. If you
Mhm.
haven't started slowing down to look at you and how you're moving through the world, get to it. You know, for some of you, it may require you, use a journal, slow the process down, make some notes about what you are noticing about yourself. I think that's an essential thing. Um, Choosing to do it maybe is one thing that comes before. It's like choosing to find out who you really, really are, you
Mhm.
know. And I think a third thing, which takes some courage, I think a third thing that we have been expressing here is around articulating our experiences, articulating our authentic experiences. And listen, we realize, I'm sure Neil and I realize that, listen, there are different contexts that determines how far you articulate your experience. And that's up to you to determine. So we understand, I understand, you don't need to go to your boss who has a history of discriminating against people of color or against women, to go to them tomorrow morning and say, hey, listen, this is who I am. Maybe not that. But so find some safe spaces where you can begin to articulate your truth, your authentic cultural expression a little bit more. Where they start telling a story about your growing up as you, as the identity that matters to you, or you being an identity that now matters to you. Whether that's a newly realized or a changed identity, whatever that is. So begin to articulate your experience, I think, is a third thing.
Mhm.
That again, that will show up in different ways. I think another thing that we've been sort of hinting at here is is around self-compassion. It's like, I think a lot of us, if not all of us, can find moments when we have suppressed, muffled, minimized, perhaps even tried to sever parts of our identities. Do some work to acknowledge that, and then be gentle with yourself when you find the parts of you that you have muffled, severed, minimized, suppressed. Be
Mhm.
gentle with yourself and make some new decisions. you know how can you begin to invite that part of you more into you, the system of you, so they're not out on the margins of your system, but you invite them more into your inner circle, your inner circle of you. I think that's a part of the big work that we're doing here, isn't it? Like
It is.
inviting more and more of ourselves into the circle of our self system so that we can be whole. And that's the thing that I'm committed to. Like we can be whole,
Yeah.
integrated.
You know, I love the validation and the
Mm,
verification that you're providing our listeners who've been following this podcast for a while. I had Coach KJ on some weeks or months ago, and he used the term remember, to remember
mm.
oneself, to come together,
Bring it
right?
back together. Yeah,
You again mentioned self compassion, which I
yeah,
believe is a part of leadership. In that same episode, I mentioned to you around full expression.
yeah,
In order to get to that place of full expression, self love is necessary, self
yeah, man.
sovereignty is
Yeah,
necessary, resilience is necessary so that you can be fully integrated,
yeah,
you can be remembered, you can be whole, and you can fully express in all aspects of yourself.
yeah, man. As my 11-year-old Jamaican self would say, you're right to rotted, man. Yeah, man. Spot on. Spot on. So true.
Yeah.
So true.
It's a beautiful conversation, Akasha. Thank you so much for coming in and, being in conversation and sharing your wisdom with our listeners. I think it's really going to be appreciated because we know A lot of people need to slow down and to notice and to grow in that space. From all dimensions of diversity. A lot of people live in this space of trying to navigate who they are and integrate in that space between the outside and the inside. So thank you for that. Thank you for being here today. And blessings, my brother, my island boy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Love to you and your listeners.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Leadership Range. If you enjoyed the episode, I invite you to peruse the others for more great conversations. If you know someone you think ought to be on the podcast, please send me an email at neil@neiledwardscoaching.com. To connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/nedwards07. I look forward to you joining in for more conversations each Monday on The Leadership Range.